As billionaire wealth soars, nearly half the world's population remains trapped in poverty. Is this modern-day colonialism?
We have seen $30 million going at an hourly basis from the global south to essentially the rich investors in the global north. So there's an extraction that continues to happen.
Is it time to reform the world's economic institutions?
One of the recommendations that we've published was a new look at the governing structures to ensure that there is greater representation from the global south in the context of their voting rights.
Hello, I'm Rida Fakhri. Welcome to the program. Today we look at a world deeply divided with growing economic disparities and social inequalities. On one side, billionaire wealth is soaring to record highs with fortunes growing by $100 million a day for the world's richest 10 individuals. On the other, nearly 44% of humanity still lives in poverty. At this year's World Economic Forum in Davos, business leaders and policymakers debated the state of the world economy. But outside, protesters held banners calling for taxes on the super rich. Meanwhile, Oxfam's latest report paints a stark picture. Colonialism isn't just history. It's alive and thriving in economic systems that extract wealth from the global south to benefit the ultra-rich in the global north. So today we ask, is the global economic order designed to keep wealth in the hands of the few? But first, let's look at some of the key findings from Oxfam's latest report. In 2024, total billionaire wealth grew 3 times faster than in 2023. It increased by $2 trillion with over 200 new billionaires created. The richest 1% own 45% of all global wealth, while rich nations control 69% of global wealth. Countries like the US, UK, and France extracted $30 million an hour through the financial system in 2023. 44% of the world's population lives under the World Bank poverty line of $6.85, with nearly 29% of the global population food insecure. Meanwhile, G7 countries still hold 41% of the votes at the IMF and the World Bank, despite having less than 10% of the world's population. So is today's economic system rigged in favor of a new aristocracy of the ultra-rich? Joining us now is Amitabh Behar, Executive Director of Oxfam International. Amitabh Behar, you have warned about the oligarchic class exercising outsized influence on global economic and political decision-making. What do you mean by the oligarchic class, and why do you see them as a threat to democracy?
If you look at the Oxfam Inequality report for 2025, it tells us that you have seen an enormous explosion of wealth absolutely at the top. This is for the billionaires who have gained almost $2 trillion in the last 1 year. Their rate of addition to their wealth has been 3 times faster than the previous year. It's pretty much adding 4 billionaires every week to the billionaire club. And this needs to be juxtaposed with the reality that you have still 44% of the global population living below poverty line. And it is important to underscore that even entities like, say, the World Bank, IMF, are clearly warning us that these levels of inequalities are untenable. They lead to political instability, breakdown of social cohesion, and essentially, it is this oligarchic class which is then controlling the economy, changes policies in favor to raise more profits for themselves. And this is pretty much about the democracies that we have, because it's not about now the people, it's about those few people, very few people at the top, the billionaires who are kind of designing the policies, the narratives for the world.
You mentioned the very few people, and obviously in the United States, there is a handful of very wealthy people, including Elon Musk, but other tech billionaires as well, exerting disproportionate influence on political decision-making. Do you see America today becoming an oligarchy? Is it an oligarchy, and what does it mean for the rest of the world?
I would actually go one step further. This is pretty much the jewel in the crown of the global oligarchies. What you're looking at is a billionaire president backed by the richest man in the world with, let me say, not just one, 13 billionaires. And this is the richest cabinet of the US ever. And it is very evident that these super rich people are going to then influence policies in a way which then further lines their pocket and further widens the gap between the poor, the people who are marginalized, excluded, living on the margins on the one hand, and the super rich on the other.
But some might say that they also drive the economy, that they boost job creation and innovation.
Thank you. As in our report this year is titled, Takers, Not Makers. The report tells us that 60% of the billionaire wealth is not earned. Let me underscore 60%. This wealth is essentially coming either through inheritance, through monopolies, or through crony connections. So I think we need to make a distinction between what the billionaires are doing and what the real world is. So let me also give you another very important data point. Last year, we had looked at the top global corporations, and for them, of the $10 of profit, $8 went straight to the pockets of shareholders. Let's not forget that it's the top 1% who own almost 45% of the global shares. And this was happening when most of the workers who do backbreaking work to give profits to their corporations were not even able to have wage hikes to cope up with inflation.
So how are you suggesting resolving this problem? Are you suggesting wealth taxes on billionaires? Can this be effective?
Yes, so there are a whole range of measures. Let me first start by saying billionaires are a sign of policy failure. It's a political choice that we make. And therefore, let's not think that it is inevitable. There are ways to change this explosion of wealth at absolutely the top level. And there are those specific measures. The first one is to tax the super wealthy. And that's something which now even the G20 in Brazil has talked of. So they have resolved to tax the super rich, the super wealthy, and I really hope that the momentum continues.
But won't the super wealthy then just simply move their assets to low tax jurisdictions?
What we're talking of is taxing the super wealthy. What we're also talking of is global tax reforms. So again, I'm very happy that the UN Tax Convention is looking at corporate taxes. We're also looking at tax havens. We're looking at ensuring how corporates need to pay their fair share of taxes, and it should not lead to tax avoidance. So it's a whole range of measures that are needed, and it cannot be done only in one country. And therefore, this global compact on addressing this question of taxing corporates and taxing the super rich needs to be taken further.
But to your critics' point, won't it also slow down innovation, entrepreneurship, economic growth?
I would really ask for evidence on that. But let me underscore the point we are making. The point is that you have enormous accumulation of wealth at absolutely the top level. We're talking of the billionaires at the moment. And if you really take away for the top few billionaires, even 99% of their wealth, they will still remain billionaires. Last year, we had estimated that within a decade, we'll have 1 trillionaire. But this year, we are saying that we'll probably within a decade have 5 trillionaires. And this is happening in the wake of where we have added 152 million people who are sleeping hungry to the global list of people living in hunger. So that's the context. And in that, accumulation of wealth absolutely at the top needs to be redistributed. It is a question of how do we look at our future.
Well, one of the ways you suggest looking at our future, and which is highlighted in Oxfam's latest report, is through reparations to former colonies. But again, critics will argue that many former colonial powers have already provided aid and development assistance to their former colonies. So why should today's taxpayers essentially pay for the historical injustices?
So first, when we're talking of reparation, it starts with acknowledging the historical wrongs. But let me also request everybody to have a look at our report this year, because the report highlights that it is not about historical colonialism. A lot of people believe that colonialism happened in the last century, in the middle of the last century, it ended. But we are clearly demonstrating how even in 2023, we have seen $30 million going at an hourly basis from the global south to essentially the rich investors in the global north. So there's an extraction that continues to happen at the moment from the global south to the global north. To your point on aid, let me give you another data point. For every dollar of aid that goes to the south, actually $4 are going to the north. So that is what we're calling as modern day colonialism, and this needs to be addressed. If you're looking at any kind of building a just society, it would be critical that we reverse this exploitation, expropriation, and extraction from the south.
How do you empower those nations in the south? How do you reverse that if you do not focus on the corruption that happens from within and the inequality that is allowed to develop within these societies?
So, absolutely agreeing with you that this is not just about the global south and the global north. We will need to address these questions nationally also. But let me just also talk about the debt repayment rates. There are 50 countries in the world which are paying almost 48% of their national budgets as debt repayment, again to the rich investors in the north. What does this do? You have around 99 countries who have actually slashed their education and health budget, which essentially means that in those global south countries, you have fewer doctors, fewer nurses, fewer teachers. And if you look at pretty much all the literature on equality, it says that investing in public services like education, health, daycare, social security are the best drivers of an equal society.
How crucial is it to rethink, reform, and perhaps even overhaul the entire mechanisms and structures of key financial institutions like the IMF, like the World Bank? You have said that they were both tools of modern-day colonialism. How do you change that?
Just look at the voting patterns. Who gets to decide the head of the World Bank? It's still the US. Who gets to decide the head of the IMF? It is still the European Union. I think this needs to change. As in, there's interesting data in our report which talks of that an average Belgian has almost 182 times more voting power than an average Ethiopian. So there's a fundamental restructuring needed for this international financial institution, which starts with democratizing their governance. It must be a reflection of the realities of the world.
Isn't this wishful thinking?
You're seeing a consolidation of the global southern voices, which are certainly going to challenge this very unequal distribution of power. And it is important, if you look at the World Bank, the IMF, World Bank has a clear charter of fighting poverty. To do that, it will need to reform itself. So you might call it wishful thinking, but according to us, it's both sensible and just governance.
Can you see it happening anytime soon?
So these are very small changes. There are fundamental changes that are required, and I really hope that we can build pressure collectively on reforming these institutions.
Amitabh, Behar, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
So, what are global institutions like the World Economic Forum doing to address the growing inequalities? We're joined by Matthew Blake, head of the World Economic Forum's Center for Financial and Monetary Systems. Matthew Blake, the World Economic Forum's stated mission is to improve the state of the world. But many of its critics argue that it is a forum for the powerful elite only, that it does not have true representation from the global south, that it prioritizes economic growth and profit over social issues like poverty. Is that fair criticism?
The forum is a multi-stakeholder, impartial platform. We work with governments from all over the world and businesses from all over the world. And we do so in a way where we try to be comprehensive in our approach to global challenges, because obviously, if you're dealing with climate, environmental change, or you're dealing with technology or issues around governance or cybersecurity, or many other issues in my world, in the finance space, combating financial crime, for instance, these are issues that traverse borders. And they know no borders. So we need to be able to address these issues holistically in a global way. If you look at our membership,
but how are you addressing these issues, though, when you consider that almost 50% of the world's population lives in poverty? How is the World Economic Forum living up to its stated aim of improving the state of the world?
So we have 1,000 businesses that we work with around the world, and increasingly our orientation is toward emerging economy. We look at water use in places like Africa. On the financial services side, we've been long students along with the World Bank and others addressing the gap in access to finance, be it a simple thing like having a bank account, or even more sophisticated discussions around being able to invest with financial literacy and fluency in markets. So we try to be a place for analysis and discussion around some of these core challenges, and we try to get as many key stakeholders to the table.
But one of the key criticisms leveled at the global economic system, which in many respects is represented by the World Economic Forum, is that the 1% super rich in the global north is extracting wealth from the global south at a rate of $30 million an hour. They call it a modern-day colonial system. It is, isn't it?
So we, in anticipation of the annual meeting this year, we took a deep look at this notion of a more fragmented global environment. And we looked at it from the vantage point of financial systems. And in actuality, one of the things that we're seeing unfold before our eyes is a bifurcation of the world in terms of different countries aligning themselves with others. And some of the core trade patterns and financial patterns that we've come to appreciate over the past 40 to 50 years are starting to potentially break down. And that has massive implications for global growth and also equality on a wealth basis. In fact, one of our most severe scenarios shows a drawdown in GDP for emerging economies approaching 11%.
Right. One of their key demands is a reduction of their debt burden. On average, low and middle income countries spend 48% of their budgets on debt repayments. It is far more than they're able to spend on education, on health.
The 11% I was referring to is a function of countries having to make choices. One of the major tailwinds we've seen over decades, and this is a contentious topic these days, is that through this notion of globalization, many people have been risen out of poverty. And the retrenching back to more kind of a multipolar world, if I may put it that way, will have significant ramifications for economic development, productivity, and the ability for poorer nations to pull themselves out of a tougher situation.
But that is not the reality, though. Do you believe that developing countries need to be relieved from their debts?
So there are multilateral organizations whose primary purpose is to work deeply with countries on financial plans to address debt and fiscal reform, et cetera. That's really their purview. And these mechanisms have been in place for a number of years. And so it's really in their remit to address that particular topic, not mine.
What about reparations? Some people suggest, like Oxfam does, that reparations must be paid to the victims of past colonialism to compensate for the damage that's been caused. The cost of reparations, they say, should be borne by the richest, who benefited the most.
So we, at the Forum, we are a neutral, independent platform. I think it's really important that we bring in those types of perspectives to the discussions that we have. And this is exactly the type of approach we take at places like our annual meeting, and also through the content that we drive throughout the year. It's critical to have different and diverging perspectives at the table. Obviously, there's a lot of debate internationally on the role of reparations in terms of leveling some historical imbalances. But rather than being an arbiter of that as an institution, that's not really our role. Our role is to make sure that those perspectives are captured in the discussion, and as various perspectives are weighed, to take the most appropriate steps forward.
But are these discussions brought forward? Is that something that is even being genuinely, seriously discussed? Because there are many who believe that the IMF and the World Bank are perpetuating economic control over poorer nations.
No, these are absolutely perspectives that are voiced in the context of the work that we do.
But is anything being done about it?
I'd referenced earlier work around this notion of fragmentation within the financial system as a result of geopolitical tensions. And one of the recommendations that we've published was a new look at the governing structures within the Bretton Woods institutions to ensure that there is greater representation from the Global South in the context of their voting rights. So yes, these are discussions that are had, proposals are made, and ultimately it's within the organizational confines of the organizations that you just referenced that would need to take action on that front.
And there are those calling for action to be taken on another front as well. There were many people protesting in Davos while the elite was meeting inside, saying that it is time to tax the rich. For example, Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men in the world, has been shown to pay less than 1% in tax, while many pay a tax rate of 40%. In America, where you are, the richest 1% possess more wealth than the bottom 90%. What needs to happen, in your view?
These are critical questions to be answered at a national level. They are political questions in many respects. If you look at Europe, you have inherently different structures. Nordic countries, also in some of the core of Europe, where there's more of a distributional aspect in terms of income and more of a social safety net. In the United States, it's a different system, and in other parts of the world, it's viewed differently as well. So these are very much political questions that need to be answered through a political process. And that's really how these things get remedied over time.
But let me ask you this, though. At a time when extreme wealth continues to be concentrated in the hands of a few, could we see widespread pushback against capitalism? Does the World Economic Forum take the threat of social unrest seriously?
So we have a annual publication that we put out, which is called our Global Risk Report. We list some of the core global risks that our global constituencies identify as being some of the most important risks at the forefront. And socioeconomic unrest is one of those. And we've seen swells of populism in different economies around the world. And I think one of the root causes there is also some discontent with the stratification of society.
But what is the Davos elite doing about all of this? Do you think that business leaders should be more proactive in addressing some of these inequalities before political and social instability actually forces any kind of drastic change?
The Forum has been a long-standing advocate for stakeholder capitalism, which essentially is about recognizing the importance of profit within a corporate environment, but also touching on how corporations deal with community and the individuals and employees that work with them, and to have more balanced and holistic view and approach toward managing a company. So I think it's kind of in our DNA to put forward a more holistic approach in a corporate environment.
All right, Matthew Blake, thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you.
Two competing perspectives, one urgent question. How do we fix a broken economic system? Extreme wealth and extreme poverty, two realities shaping our world. As billionaire fortunes continue to rise and nearly half of the world's population remains trapped in poverty, one thing is clear: billionaire wealth is often extracted, fueled by monopolies, cronyism, and modern colonialism. The current economic model clearly isn't working. The richest 1% have more wealth than the bottom 95% of the world's population put together. Is the growing inequality a product of an unfair system? Well, it's clear the ultra-wealthy and the powerful corporations they control are using their massive wealth to influence global political decision-making, to serve their interests at the expense of people everywhere. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team. Thanks for watching.